My name is Sienna, and at 31 years old, I learned that family loyalty has an expiration date written in someone else's handwriting. For 6 years, I quietly covered my mother's medical bills, believing I was the daughter holding our family together. But on the night of my father's retirement party, I found the trust documents sitting open in his study. They had moved the lake house, the savings, every asset that mattered into my younger brother's name alone, leaving me as a single dollar to make sure I couldn't contest it. When I confronted them, my mother told me I was being dramatic, that I'd always had more money than I knew what to do with anyway. So I smiled, excused myself, and made one phone call from the parking lot that would unravel everything they thought they had secured. Before I tell you the rest, let me know where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever been the one who gave everything and got nothing back, hit subscribe because this story is for you. I grew up in Lake Forest, a quiet manicured suburb north of Chicago where everyone's lawn looked like it had been ironed. My father, Walter, no, that's not right. My father went by his middle name, Owen, though everyone in town just called him Mr. Hale. He ran a regional insurance agency that had been in the family for 2 generations. My mother, Diane, sold real estate on the side, mostly to keep herself busy, mostly to keep an eye on which neighbors were doing better than us. I was the older child. My brother Tucker was 4 years younger, and from the moment he was born, the air in our house seemed to rearrange itself around him. He was the boy. He was the one who'd carry the Hale name forward, my father liked to say, as if we were a dynasty instead of a family that sold home insurance out of a strip mall office. I never resented Tucker exactly. He was easy to love in the way golden retrievers are easy to love, not because they've earned it, but because they're soft and warm and never ask hard questions. What I resented was the math. By the time I was 12, I understood that praise in our house was a finite resource, and somehow it always ran out before it reached me, so I stopped waiting for it. I got a scholarship to study finance at Northwestern. I worked 2 jobs through college so I wouldn't have to ask my parents for a dime, because asking meant owing, and owing meant being reminded of it at every holiday dinner for the rest of my life. By 26, I had a job at a boutique investment firm in the Loop, making more money than both my parents combined, and I never once mentioned the number out loud, because I'd learned that the moment you tell this family what you have, they start finding reasons you should be the one to spend it. It started small. A loan for my mother's knee surgery that was never meant to be paid back, not really, not by her. Then her cardiologist bills. Then a temporary gap when my father's agency lost 2 major accounts in the same quarter, and the mortgage on the house came due. I told myself I was doing it because I loved them, because that's what good daughters do. Because Tucker had a wife and 2 kids, and a landscaping business that hadn't turned a profit in 3 years, and someone had to be the responsible one. For 6 years, on the 15th of every month, I transferred $2,800 into my parents' joint checking account. I never made a show of it, I never posted about it, never brought it up at dinner, never once said the words, "You're welcome." I just paid, quietly, like it was rent on a guilt I didn't remember signing the lease for. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until that November night, was that while I was wiring money every month like a dutiful daughter, my parents were sitting down with an estate attorney named Gerald Voss to make absolutely sure none of it would ever come back to me. The retirement party was at the country club my father had belonged to for 30 years without ever once breaking 90 on the golf course. White tablecloths, a string quartet nobody asked for, my mother in a champagne-colored dress she'd bought for the occasion, and definitely not paid for with her own money. Tucker stood up and gave a toast about Dad's legacy, about how proud he was to be carrying the Hale name into the next generation, and I clapped along with everyone else. Because that's what I did, I clapped for Tucker. I'd been clapping for Tucker my whole life. Halfway through the dinner, my father excused himself to take a call in his study, which was really just code for sneaking a cigarette he thought my mother didn't know about. I went looking for him 20 minutes later because the band wanted to know if he was ready for his speech. And that's when I found the study door cracked open and the desk lamp on, and a leather folder sitting wide open on the blotter like it had been left there for someone to find. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that, because I've turned this over in my head 100 times since. I walked in to get my father, and my own name on a page of legal text is the kind of thing your eyes catch before your brain decides whether it should. Declaration of Trust. The Hale Family Revocable Trust. I shouldn't have kept reading, I read anyway. The lake house in Lake Geneva, the one I'd spent every summer of my childhood swimming off the dock of, the one whose property taxes I had personally covered for the last 3 years without anyone asking how I managed it, transferred entirely into Tucker's name. The investment portfolio, just under $1.4 million, structured to pass to Tucker upon my parents' deaths, with no provision for me whatsoever. And then, near the bottom, in a section labeled Specific Bequests, I found my own name. To my daughter, Sienna Hale, I leave the sum of $1, 1 pint. It being my intention that she receive nothing further from my estate, this amount given expressly to prevent any future claim or contest against this trust. $1. 6 years, $2,800 a month. I did the math standing right there in that study, my hand shaking against the door frame. 2-on-1, $600. That's what I'd given them. And in return, they'd hired a lawyer to make sure I couldn't even legally object to being erased. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find my father standing in the doorway, a cigarette already lit, his retirement party bow tie loosened around his neck. He didn't apologize, he didn't even look surprised. He looked, if anything, mildly inconvenienced, like I'd caught him forgetting to take out the trash rather than caught him erasing me from his life in writing. "It's not what you think," he said, which is the kind of sentence people only say when it's exactly what you think. "Explain it to me then," I said. "Explain to me how it's not what I think." He sighed the way he used to sigh when I was 16 and asked too many questions about the family budget. "Tucker has a family to provide for, Sienna. You've always managed fine on your own. We assumed you'd understand the practicality of it." The practicality of it. 6 years of automatic transfers reduced to a word like that. My mother appeared behind him, drawn by the sound of voices that weren't celebrating. When she saw the folder open on the desk, her face did something complicated. Not guilt, I realized later, but irritation. The specific irritation of someone whose carefully managed surprise had gone off early. "This is exactly why we didn't tell you," she said. "You're being dramatic. You make more money than the rest of this family combined, Sienna. You don't need it. Tucker has children. He has responsibilities." "I have a mortgage payment on this house too," I said. "Did you know that? Every month for 3 years. Did Tucker know that? That was a gift," my mother said. "From a daughter who loves her parents. We never asked you to keep a ledger." I want to tell you I had some perfect cutting line in that moment, something that silenced the room and made them see exactly what they'd done. I didn't. I just stood there, $201,600 sitting in my chest like a stone, while my mother adjusted the strap of her champagne dress, and my father took another drag of his cigarette like the conversation was already over. "Tucker is the one who'll carry this family forward," my father said almost gently, like he was doing me a kindness by explaining it slowly. "You've always been independent. We thought you'd be proud of that, not bitter about it." I left the study. I didn't say goodbye to Tucker, who was still out on the dance floor with his wife, completely unaware that he'd just become a $1.4 million man. While I stood in his father's study, holding a single dollar bill that didn't exist yet but somehow already felt heavier than anything I owned, I walked out to the parking lot in my heels, the cold November air hitting me like something honest for the first time all night. I sat in my car for a long moment without starting the engine. Then I opened my banking app, looked at the automatic transfer scheduled for the 15th, 6 days away, and I canceled it. Not paused, canceled permanently the recurring payment that had run uninterrupted for 6 years. Then I made one more call, not to my parents. To my own attorney, a woman named Priya Chandrasekaran I'd worked with twice before on business matters and trusted completely, and I asked her a single question that had just occurred to me with startling, cold clarity: who actually held the deed to the lake house? Because here's the detail my parents had forgotten, or maybe never fully understood in the first place. 3 years earlier, when my father's agency was bleeding money and the lake house mortgage was 2 payments behind, I hadn't just covered the payments. I had refinanced it, in my name with my credit because theirs was too damaged to qualify on its own. My father had signed a quitclaim deed at the time, supposedly temporary, supposedly just a formality to satisfy the new lender, transferring legal title into my name until things stabilized. Things had never stabilized and nobody had ever asked for the title back, and I had simply never brought it up. Because at the time I didn't think it mattered. It mattered now. The Hale Family Revocable Trust had just listed, as one of its primary assets to be inherited by Tucker, a house that my parents did not legally own. I didn't tell anyone that night. I drove home, took off the heels, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop until 2 in the morning, pulling every document I had. The quitclaim deed, 3 years of mortgage statements in my name, the tax records, the wire transfer history going back 72 months. I built a folder. I didn't build it out of cruelty. I built it because for the first time in my life, I needed proof that I existed in this family's story as something other than a checkbook. The first missed mortgage payment notice went out on December 1st, 2 weeks after the party. My mother texted me that same afternoon. No greeting, no apology, just, "The mortgage is due. Did something happen with the transfer?" I stared at that message for a long time. 6 years of monthly silence between us, and the first words she sent me after disinheriting me were about money. I typed and deleted 4 different responses before I settled on the one I actually sent. "I'm not paying the mortgage anymore. You can ask Tucker, since he's the one inheriting everything." She called 11 times over the next 2 days. I let every single one go to voicemail. My father texted once, "Your mother is very upset. This isn't like you, call us." I didn't call. By the second week of December, the calls turned into something closer to panic. Tucker called me directly, which he almost never did. "Mom says you stopped helping with the house," he said, his voice carrying the particular tone of a man who'd just realized his comfortable life ran on rails he'd never bothered to look at. "Dad's freaking out. He says if this payment doesn't go through, they're going to start foreclosure proceedings." "That's between them and the bank," I said. "Sienna, come on. We're family." "Funny," I said. "I don't remember being on the trust." He went quiet on the other end of the line, and in that silence I understood that he genuinely hadn't known. He hadn't seen the document. He'd just been told the way I'd been told my whole life, that things would be taken care of, and he'd never once thought to ask how, or by whom, or at what cost to someone else. By mid-December, my father, apparently believing the house was still legally tied to him in some way that gave him leverage, went to a different bank to try to take out a home equity line of credit against the lake house, presumably to cover the mortgage gap and buy himself time. The loan officer ran a title search as standard procedure. What came back stopped the application cold. The property was titled solely in my name, Sienna Hale, with no co-owners, no liens in my father's favor, nothing. My father did not own the house he had just bequeathed in writing to his son. I found out about this not from my father, who would never have admitted it, but from Priya, who got a call from the title company doing routine verification, since my name was the one on every record. She called me laughing, actually laughing, something I'd never heard from her in 2 years of working together. "Sienna," she said, "I think your father just tried to mortgage a house he doesn't own." I didn't gloat. I want to say that clearly because it would have been easy to. Instead, I sent my parents one final message, the only one I sent unprompted that entire month. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about who actually owns the lake house. You may want to talk to your attorney before you make any more decisions about it." My mother's response came 9 minutes later, and it wasn't an apology. It was fury. "How dare you? After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us, by stealing from your own brother." I read that message standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, and something in me that had been bent for 31 years finally, quietly snapped straight. I hadn't stolen anything. I had simply stopped pretending that a deed with my name on it meant nothing because they'd assumed it always would. I blocked her number that night, then my father's. Then, after one more guilt-laden voicemail from Tucker about how I was tearing the family apart, I blocked his too, though I did it with more hesitation, because some part of me still believed he hadn't fully understood what his inheritance had been built on. The lake house situation dragged through January. My parents hired Gerald Voss again, this time to contest my ownership, claiming the quitclaim deed had been intended as temporary, and that I had taken advantage of their financial distress to seize the property permanently. It was frankly an absurd claim to make against the daughter who had refinanced the house, covered 3 years of taxes, and never once asked for recognition. Priya handled it in a single afternoon, producing the original signed deed. The lender correspondence explicitly stating the transfer was a condition of refinancing, not a temporary courtesy, and 72 months of payment records that made it very clear who had actually been keeping the roof over their heads. They dropped the claim in February. I think, more than losing the legal argument, what broke them was realizing how thoroughly documented their dependence on me actually was. Every payment had a date. Every wire transfer had a memo line. 6 years of quiet sacrifice, and it turned out to be the most airtight paper trail of my life. I sold the lake house in March. I want to be honest about how that felt because it wasn't simple triumph. I had loved that house. I had learned to swim off that dock. There was a version of this story where I kept it out of spite, drove up every summer just to remind my parents what they'd lost. I didn't do that. I listed it instead, fully renovated the kitchen and dock first with money that was, for once, entirely mine to spend, and sold it for $1.1 million, nearly triple what my parents had originally paid for it decades earlier, back when Lake Geneva real estate was still affordable for people like them. I used part of that money to pay off my own mortgage in Chicago. I used another part to set up a fund, not for my parents, not for Tucker, but for myself. The kind of cushion that meant I would never again have to choose between my own financial security and someone else's comfort. And I used a small piece of it, the part I'm least proud of and least ashamed of, to send my parents a single certified letter in April, accompanied by a check for exactly $1. I included no note. I didn't need one. The amount said everything the trust had once tried to say to me. Tucker reached out one more time in late spring, not through a blocked number, but through a mutual friend who passed along his message. He said he understood now, that he'd had no idea what our parents had built their plans on, that he wanted to talk when I was ready. I believe him, mostly. I think he was raised just like I was, to never ask where the money came from, only to be grateful it was there. The difference between us is that I eventually had to learn the answer the hard way, and he never had to learn it at all. Until the house he was supposed to inherit turned out to belong to someone else entirely. I haven't spoken to my parents since the certified letter. I don't know if I ever will. Some days that feels like a wound. Most days now it feels more like the absence of one, the strange lightness of a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying until I finally set it down. I still think about the dock sometimes, the cold lake water in July, my father teaching me to dive off the end of it when I was 8 years old. Before he learned to measure his children by what they could provide rather than who they were. I don't regret the 6 years I spent paying their bills. I think I needed to learn in my own time exactly what I was worth to them, and there was no way to learn it except by giving everything and watching what came back. What I regret is how long it took me to read the room, or in my case, to read the document left open on a desk, the one piece of honesty my parents ever gave me, even if they never meant to give it at all. These days, when people ask me about my family, I tell them I have a brother I'm cautiously rebuilding something with, and parents I send a Christmas card to once a year, signed with my name and nothing else. It's not the family I was raised to perform loyalty for, but it's the truth finally, written in my own handwriting instead of theirs.